Hello everybody, and thank you for taking the time to access this short CPD video on providing effective modelling in the remote classroom. It was important that we shared some of the best practice around this specific pedagogical element of remote teaching because firstly, it was something that teachers identified as an area for development in their own practice and where they wanted more CPD. And it's also something that's emerging as a focus from the initial review of our remote curriculum offer that we completed at the end of term 3. So this video tries to capture these three things that are in this box here. First of all, addressing the question, why is modelling important for the successful application of knowledge and skill? How we can translate those key principles that we know work into the virtual classroom, and then finally by sharing some examples of best practice. There are some screenshots of best practice, largely from English lessons, because I've got more readily available resource to show that. But alongside this, in the remote educational channel, you will find a series of clipped videos or full lessons where modelling has been applied successfully in a variety of subjects, including maths and art, and subjects where we don't necessarily model just writing. So why is modelling important for successful application of knowledge and skill? It's important to start with the concept of modelling because much of our approach to remote education has been about emulating as much of the classroom experience as we can online. The more familiar students are with the tasks that we ask them to complete and the series of learning activities we deliver to them, the greater their success and progress will be, and ultimately will lead to an easier transition back into school when we reopen. So if we think back to September and the pedagogical goodie bag that everybody received, and Rosenshine's principles being part of that. Sequencing concepts and modelling is one of the key principles that teachers should apply to get the most successful outcomes. And in Tom Sherrington's book, when he talks about applying Rosenshine's principles, he talks about presenting new material using small steps, providing models and providing scaffolds for difficult tasks. And each of those things kind of go hand in hand to making learning feel, first of all, accessible for the student and ensuring high levels of success and that students feel that success. Okay, so a couple of quotes really to embed this in research. Adam Riches, writing in the Secondary Educational Journal in 2019, said, modelling is a great way to make sure that your teaching has the right levels of success and challenge. Okay, just because we're showing children how to do something does not mean that the content is any less challenging. In fact, what it enables us to do is raise the challenge in the demand of the text or the demand of the activity, because we're making the process of completion easier for the student. Effective teacher modelling can help to address misconceptions before they arise. So in much of the curriculum work that you've been working on in terms of your long-term plans and your road stories with Lisa, and some of the exemplar models that have been shared at Middle Leaders have been identifying the misconceptions that we think may arise within a given lesson or topic and using modelling to kind of dispel those misconceptions before they become embedded in a student's long-term memory. Efficient modelling can also drastically reduce your workload outside of the classroom. Okay, because actually we can tie it in with the assessment, we can use modelling and feedback, which actually reduces the amount of time that you're spending on other activities. And when we are modelling and spending the time and energy on modelling, we know it's having high levels of impact. And because we have rooted so firmly in terms of our learning segments, which are underpinned by Rosenshine's principles, we have to consider something that Tom Sherrington has said in 2014 in his pedagogical postcard series. The power of teacher modelling lies in finding a good balance with student practice. So we're keeping students active in the process of learning rather than just showing them what it is they need to do. So we model, we practice, we review, we model again, we practice and review, and that's the cycle that's needed. He said, "My feeling is that we miss opportunities to model, and there are still lots of occasions when students go from being told things in abstract to being asked to do things without anyone modeling the process explicitly. Did I show them how to plot a graph how I'd like? Did I show them how to set up an electric circuit and take lots of readings quickly? Did I show them how to do the calculation I've just asked them to perform? Too often, I think I've asked them what to do without showing them, and the difference is quite significant." Okay, and actually, I know I'm guilty of this in the remote classroom. We'll become so task focused, so focused on what needs to be handed in and completed, and the direction of this is how you hand it in, this is where you find the materials, that we miss that learning how that's absolutely needed to ensure students are independently applying the knowledge they've acquired in a remote lesson. So if we think back to our approach as an academy and we think about the learning segments, we have to remember that they're a jigsaw and every piece has a place in the learning journey. If we miss something out, then the learning is incomplete. And that is exactly the same in classroom practice as it is online. You have to remember in terms of modelling that you are the expert. You are the trained teacher. You have to show students what excellence looks like, and you have to show that it's achievable to reduce the I can't and I don't know how. Okay, so it's simplifying the process, it's removing the curtain, it's being absolutely engaged at a student level in the dialogue about how you do something. So if you look at this sequence across the bottom, which is a basic learning process, which shows us how the segments can be used and how modelling can be used too. So if we think about the first part here, number 1, that's our new knowledge, okay? We're taking something, a concept, an idea or a skill that we want to teach students, and that's where we're starting, okay? We won't always start there because sometimes the thing that we're asking students to do will be heavily based on stuff that they've done previously, and we start somewhere else within the segment. Remember, there is no journey in these segments. We piece them together in our curriculum, decide which activities are needed at what point to sequence the learning for students. Then we're going to water that new knowledge. We're going to help it grow and we're going to help it develop with the students. Question and answer, for example, would be something that we're doing to develop together there. Further reading and different examples. And then becomes let me show you. And the me bit in that is so, so important because you're owning that process of modelling. Okay, and then we might come back and develop together again once the model has been done. Actually, how can we model together? How can we create something together, working in partnership with the students? And then we might then begin to independently apply what we've gathered there, the new knowledge, the development and the modelling coming together into a student response. And then we can then assess and address the areas in there that students are unclear about, which might take us further back down that sequence, back to another number. And then we're doing retrieve, embed and refine finally to decide how well that knowledge has been acquired, what further developments needed. And as you can see, the arrows might take you back to a different point in the process, a different place in the jigsaw. Okay, but the developing together, assess and address, and let me show you will all include elements of modelling if we're doing these things in a highly effective way. So they are the basic principles of modelling, and we are very aware of how much we need to do it. How do we translate that into the virtual classroom, where we know challenges and barriers are already exemplified by the distance that exists between us and the students? So the first thing I would say is the delivery of the material absolutely matters. The model works best when there is a controlled amount of application that takes place. Okay, so you're not trying to model everything a student needs to do all at once. The smaller steps, the bridging that journey become more important. The cognitive load of a student is already massively increased in the virtual environment. It's incredibly new to them. They're trying to dominate new technology. Okay, they're trying to take command of how they submit work and manage a number of subjects at once. So you need to be incredibly explicit and clear about what it is that needs to be modelled and what it is that you want students to do in that model. Okay, so if the modelling is the precursor to the independent application, make sure those two things are married together. So the top tips around that could be being explicit about the elements you want to see. This does not mean to need to be full success or 100% of everything. Try and overtly verbalize this, trying to add images to it to help embed it in the long-term memory. Repetition, okay? So not just showing the model once, but returning to the model frequently in a sequence of lessons or over the course of one lesson. And multimedia can also work well too, okay? So ensuring that the model is there in a handout, okay, in the PowerPoint, in the team, there as an image. Ensure these are linked to the form of assessment that the ultimate independent application will require. Okay, so if you have decided I am modelling 3 success criteria, they need to be the same success criteria that you are going to feed back on when students complete the work. This will keep it simple and accessible for the students. It will get to the heart of exactly what you want them to do, and you will see an increase in participation and completion because you're stripping away the peripheral things that students don't understand. Secondly, choose the model needed carefully. And I really want to stress this, the more the merrier. Allow for student interaction and contribution to the process. So the top tips here are increase the number of worked examples because that can lead to higher completion and success rates. So where you might do 1 in the normal classroom, if you were in school, try and do a sequence of 3 maybe, or ensure it's part of every single lesson. Ensure that you come back to the same question before moving on and that students are exposed to a number of models. Demystify the act of completion. Talk students through the process. Take on the role of the student. Model for them that they can make mistakes and that they can correct them and that points are difficult. So this is the hardest bit. Okay, what can we say here? Let's have a think. Well, if I go back to and model where students can find things, okay, where they can return to their notes, and that will help them when they work later independently. Get students to deconstruct excellence with you, okay? So where you've got the highest grade possible answer, the most perfect answer you could ever imagine to that specific task, show them it. Read through it with them. Take it apart. Show them the key elements of success. Color code them. Add in annotations. Question students around it. Make them feel confident enough that they can also produce the same excellence. And finally, allow students to see their work as a model itself. Their work too is shareable, including as much of their work, not to critique or show everything that's gone wrong, but actually where the successes are, will make students feel that they are the model, that they too can have something to share in terms of success. And finally, what comes next? We think about all of the time in our teaching, creating that learning loop. The learning doesn't end with the model. It has to link into something else that is going to follow on sequentially. So what scaffolds are going to remain at the end of the modelling process to support that independence? So think about these top tips. Scale back the support slowly. In the same way you carefully selected a discrete amount of content before delivery, ensure that you are just as careful with the removing of scaffold. Making students do too much too quickly will result in them switching off and not completing what you've asked them to do. And we know how reluctant some of them are to ask the questions about the learning in the virtual context. You absolutely want high levels of success. So repeat the activity. If they haven't got it right the first time, then come back to that model again. Add in the scaffold again. It is not a failure, it is a process. And it's so important that they see that process too. And finally, and it probably goes without saying, reward students when they have done something well, however heavy the scaffold might be, and use work in the feedback. Okay, so when you feed back to them, show them their successes, highlight them. We want to, as Doug Lemoff tells us in the teaching in the online classroom, we want to dissolve that screen. We want to do the things that we can do in the normal classroom, and we would always be praising and sharing that work. So ensure you try and continue that in the online experience. So moving on now to examples of best practice. So modelling for the modellers, if you will. So you can see over the next couple of slides just some examples of each of those top tips in practice. But they are not exhaustive, and please do look at the videos where you can see some of these top tips in action in teachers' lessons across the academy. And as I see and are shared with more of these, I will continue to replenish that folder with more examples of the great things that are happening. So here is just an example of a model answer that's deconstructed here, but the point I want to make really is about that yellow box that you can see there. The 6 things that, this is from my lesson, where I wanted to see the students using academic language, precise vocab. I want them to link to the question and so on. So in the model that I did take from Oak, I didn't reinvent the wheel. It was good. So I reduced my workload by copying and pasting that. And I took them through the things I wanted to see. So we could circle it and we could talk about it and we could question it. Okay. And then the only assessment that follows that is a mark out of 6. Have you done these things? The target then becomes to do these 3 things, and we can repeat the process with the student exemplar answers that are produced in the independent activity. So we can think now about some examples of how we demystify the process as a teacher and how we can deconstruct excellence and involve students in the act of modelling. So my top tip is use what is there, okay? Modelling can sometimes feel overly labouring, I suppose, because we've got to then produce them and we've got to write them, and then sometimes there's a fear of live modelling in the lesson in that you won't be able to kind of take the students where you want them to go. And so all that over preparation actually you don't have time for in your planning, and that's sometimes where students teachers do not use modelling. So use exam board materials, okay, colour code them and talk about them with the students, and then you can focus on the process in your narration, in your teaching delivery, and add in different errors or where they could have said something differently, and incorporate questioning there, which kind of makes it a much more manageable experience and still highly effective. And it allows you, particularly with this kind of colour coding, to kind of zoom in on the specific area that a student needs to work on, okay, making it very bespoke to the gaps or the areas for improvement that you've already identified in a student's work. And also, you can use the I do, we do, you do model, okay? So you can then deconstruct the I do one, where you can model the process, you can pre-prepare it, you can use exam board materials, you can collaboratively do this together, and there's some examples of that in the video where you can take student answers and type them in. You can use the collaborative space in OneNote to get students to type those things in and incorporate them, those live elements and that live discussion into the assignment setting, live within the lesson. And then finally leading into that independent practice, okay? And they got there the sentence starters, the vocabulary that they need to use that will help them produce something of an incredibly high quality. And finally, just that use of the work in feedback. So when I've done my my feedback lessons with my Year 11 group, and this is an example of a student in my Year 11 group, where I took a little section out of her independent response, and we then worked through that as a class. And I did that with 4 or 5 students in the room of differing abilities and different areas, where we could still find areas for development and look at those areas for success together, and that can then be picked apart, and you can set it up as an independent activity and then use the dialogue that's already there. So do use students' work. Okay, still use them. And this activity really did then lead back into a scaffolded dirt task, where students still had those sentence starters available to them, had specific targets to focus on, as well as the 5 examples of different students' work to draw on and to use and to magpie from. So that brings us to the end of the recorded video session. Please do go and look at the videos of where modelling is used in a range of different subjects. I've tried to clip them. For some of them, I've left them as full lesson long videos, because there was a number of instances of modelling within there. And hopefully you'll be able to take some of those top tips, see those top tips in those videos, and begin to incorporate them into your lessons over the next couple of weeks while we are still teaching remotely. Because the more we can do now, the greater success we have now, the easier the transition back to school will be. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Take care.